Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, guys, this is my honor to welcome our guests because I know that they're coming with a couple of things that are being very expensive. Their time, 24 hours has been offered to every man and woman on this planet. What you do with that 24 hours will tell me much about you. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created David. It has actually deposited a couple of things that we want access to. What are those things? Wisdom, knowledge, insights, all of those wonderful principles that he has learned from his journey. And we want access to that. And so we want to honor him that he's coming and allowing us to see some of his vulnerability. How did he get there? And this precious time that he's about to spend with us. And so, David, I want to thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Ken, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to speak with you.
I'm looking forward to this, by the way. There's this question I usually ask everyone that shows up, man. And I love it because it speaks to that second journey, the interdependent journey. And my question to you is this, and it gives you a chance to let the audience know what you are doing right now. The question is, David, how do you serve mankind?
What a beautiful question. Well, it's timely in that I'm releasing my fourth book today, and it's called Becoming One with Christ. Yeah, it's called Becoming One with Christ, The Lessons of King David. And it looks at the relationship between King David and Jesus and why that's important for all of us. Because in many ways, King David embodies the fall of humanity, if you understand.
Yes.
The covenant that was promised to him and then how he broke from that covenant. And so really it's about waking up to the reality that whatever is great and true in one of us is great and true for all of us. And instead of a dependency on something outside of you, it's waking up to realize that everything, your divine grace, your strength, your power, it's all inside of you. And that's the journey that we all get to undertake, is overcoming ourselves, the hero's journey, facing the dragon or facing our darkness and overcoming and integrating that darkness so that we can rise into something greater.
Yeah, it's a part of that darkness that allows us to become servants, if you will. It is from that space that one, because we become available or aware of certain pitfalls when we're staring at it. And as we are guided through it, through ups and downs and mistakes and all those different things, we become a little more wiser, if you will. And that's when we escort from out of there. We are able to help others so that they can not be involved in any of those pitfalls, if you will, because we have been able to find them, locate them, and know how to come out from them. So yeah, I love the dark places. I used to be afraid of them, but now I love them because it is how God's method, his ways. The Bible talks about Moses, you show his ways, but the people his acts. And so one of the ways of God is to use trauma and hard times to bless us and give us insights and wisdom. One of our customs here, David, is to go back, I call it the beginning of our beginnings. So we have a couple of locations that we visit when we hit the planet. The family is the first, then we move through. Within the family, there's a couple of things that goes on there. We're going to learn communication skills. We're going to learn about belief system. We're going to start developing our patterns of behavior. Very, very important location. We're going to learn about mindset, good or bad. We're going to start learning principles there, perceptions now that will guide our life as we are moving through. What was your family unit like?
Yeah, well, and I love how you frame that, because we inherit our beliefs before we ever choose them, right? We don't consciously as little kids think about what we're going to believe. I grew up in a Judeo-Christian family. My family was United Methodist. My father was in the military. So he served in the Marines for 31 years. He was from small town Iowa. My mom was from just outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So very kind of traditional, conservative. And what makes that even more so is when you get onto a military base, it's almost like you're stepping back into another universe or back in time, because there is such a consistency of life from one military base to the other, because everyone works for the same boss. The houses all look the same. You go to schools on base. You go to play soccer on base. Sports are all on base. The gym's on base. Movies are on base. And it's a very just small, unique culture. And then you go outside into the real world and it's very different because there's not a fence around a lot of neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods are gated. So in that sense, it traditional in terms of the culture and values. It was atypical in that we moved every 2 or 3 years. And that was very disruptive for me personally because I love making friends and being friends with people. And then this was obviously well before the age of the internet. When you left a military base and went somewhere else, it's not like you're going to start FaceTiming or texting those people. You're not going to see them again. And so that was very disruptive. It was also beautiful in that I got to spend 3 years in Japan when I was starting in 5th grade. And that exposure to different cultures at such a young age had a huge impression on me in shaping my beliefs and evolving my beliefs. And that was really kind of the beginning for me of going on the internal journey because in my experience, the West doesn't really focus as much on the internal journey as the East does. And I started learning how to meditate when I was 13 years old.
Wow. That is impressive. I know I always tell people to try and get some exposure outside of your culture, especially when you're looking at the Asian culture, which is much older than ours and civilization, and their belief, India, different China, all these different, Japan is another ancient civilization that they had access, if you will, to human development long before we did. And so they had gained some knowledge, if you will. And we get an opportunity to look into it when we visit and see some of the power that resides within that culture just from them exploring the inner being of the individual versus just the materialistic things that we pursue in the West. And so it is a beautiful experience. And I tell anyone, get there, please. You will learn much. You become empathetic. Your being changes. Let me put it that way. I don't know what else to say. Your being changes. And that means everything about you, your belief, your thoughts about things, everything becomes disrupted. As a young individual, when I know the moving and how that creates an unstableness within one, but it also allows you to adapt, make different friends. So you're adaptable, all those different things as one begins to move and toss back and forth in that type of lifestyle. This young individual, still at a young age, picked up the tool, one of the most powerful tools known to mankind, meditation. How did it begin to affect David at that young age?
Yeah, that's a great question. It made me eccentric among my classmates. And especially, so I came back to the United States in 8th grade and I was still on a military base, but I quickly realized that of my classmates, there was only one other person who had lived in Japan and everyone else was all America all the time. And so there wasn't this appreciation for what most, and it wasn't just Japan. So while we were there, we went to the Philippines, we went to South Korea. So I got to see even more culture. And the Philippines had this incredible poverty. And then you have a metropolis like Seoul, South Korea, which is this huge city. And so coming back, I was struck by, I would spend, while kids were going to, or my classmates were going to high school football games on Friday nights, I would be sitting down trying to quiet my mind. I would be in my living room with a Japanese sword, this cheap Japanese sword that I had taken with me, trying to calm and quiet my mind because I had read a book on that's what you're supposed to do, empty your mind and then wait for this thought to appear and this magic thing happens. And I couldn't quite get it, but I knew I appreciated the power of beauty and delicacy that I took with me from Japanese culture. And in some sense, that was the beginning of the inner journey for me. And yet it also was something that made me stand out from my classmates. And when, certainly in the 80s, popularity was a currency in high school. And I didn't have a lot of that currency.
Yeah, it is a wonderful tool. When I developed it, when I got introduced to meditation, I was a single dad with my 4 boys, and I had them meditating with me because I knew the power of it as an individual, what it was doing to me. And I thought, yeah, these boys are going to be something else. Once I began to bring them in and walk with them through meditation, and sure enough, these guys are something else because of that, the introduction to that. Talk to me about something, because this disturbance of one's security does really truly have an effect on that individual. It causes some behaviors, if you will, underlying behaviors that manifest as we are growing in life. Sometimes it's a behavior that we are not aware of consciously, but then it just manifests because it's there because of that. What was that manifestation with you, David, with others outside of the family, your friends and stuff like that? What did that manifestation, because I know it manifests, you know, how
Yeah.
did that manifest and what did it look like?
Was very much something of a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And it was a combination of things. One, and we can talk about it if you'd like. I had a near death experience when I was 6 years old.
Oh,
I had
please,
traumatic.
we'll talk about everything, David.
Yeah.
Talk about all of it, man.
Yeah. So I'll start there just because it's so relevant to my journey as a whole. So for 4 years, we lived off base. So we lived out
Yeah.
in the regular world in outside of College Park, Maryland. This was when I was between kindergarten and third grade. And my best friend was this kid, Danny, who lived up the street from me. And I have an older brother who's 3 years older than me. Danny had an older brother who's 3 years older than him. And then they had another brother who was, I think, 2 years older than that brother. And so we always hung out. We always did these things together. But Danny used to get really angry. And it was the kind of anger where he had to be physically restrained. Like it was
Wow.
beyond a temper tantrum. We used to call him a spaz. And one day we're in someone's backyard. This was a stranger's backyard. It was the 1970s. We were, at 6 years old, we were roaming the streets. So it's a very unorthodox. You wouldn't see that today. We're in a stranger's backyard and there's some construction in the backyard. And then Danny's oldest brother said, "Hey, it's time to go home to have dinner." And that set Danny off. He got really mad and his brother started trying to calm him down. But before they could do anything, there was a hammer lying on the ground. And Danny picked up the hammer and he pulled it back to throw it. And so everybody just panicked and turned to run. He threw it and it hit me in the back of the head. I was out. And I blocked the memory from my mind until the pandemic. And then the pandemic came back. I remember watching his oldest brother carry my body down the street to their house to take me to the hospital.
Wow.
And I couldn't get back into my body. I had this experience. I couldn't get back to my body. So the next conscious memory I had was waking up. I'm at home. I've got a bandage on my head. Danny's there with his mom. He's crying. He gives me a coloring book and life goes on. And I just kind of blocked that from my mind. So at the same time, I had this overwhelming sense that somehow a woman was going to play a significant role in my life when it came to God. And it was this destiny altering shift. And so I took that sense of romance with me as I started growing up. And by the time I was 10, I was writing girls' poems. By the time I got to high school, to kind of pick up on getting back from Okinawa, Japan, and getting into high school and realizing that I wasn't really popular in a way that was attractive to being one of the cool kids in school, I became a people pleaser. I became something of a court jester. I was like the Jim Carrey, always trying to make jokes and crack people up as a way of being accepted. And that was me sort of splitting off from the kid who liked comic books or the kid who liked video games, because those things weren't popular at the time. And so there was this very much a psychological split taking place where there was the persona that I was presenting in school to be accepted and to try to fit in and find that current of popularity. And then there was the person who still loved reading about the X-Men or Iron Man and playing video games on his Atari or whatever. And so there's very good split. And it was the security piece for me was I need to, the things that people don't appreciate or don't like about who I am, I need to pull back from those and present a persona, to kind of use Carl Jung's terminology, that is more socially acceptable to people.
Yeah, it's the survival stage, David. As powerful as we are very creative in creating a story, whatever that story is, to assist us to navigate through that first space of survival when the trauma hits and when we're living through the trauma, and become pretty adept at it. But that story, if you will, begins to change and begins to interrupt our life later on as we're getting older, and where it doesn't serve us anymore. It's something we will have to face, if you will, in the journey or on the journey as we embark on it. Here's this young man affected near life situation, and he's moving through, he's making his adjustments. And as any family is, you're looking at college and military or a military family, as you mentioned, you're looking at those split right there. And you're at that age where you have to make that decision. I understand the pull of it being a military family, but what was any conflict that was happening with you? Was there a conflict where you wanted to go this way versus the military route? And why did you eventually pick the military route
Oh yeah,
versus the college?
absolutely, absolutely. Well, so I went to college on a military scholarship, and yet
Yeah.
that was kind of my last resort. And part of it was I loved Hollywood from an early age. I was fascinated. I loved comic books. I mean,
Yeah.
superhero movies today, I think, are such an enriching form of spectacle. Like, it's just to see what Marvel has done, to see what DC is doing. It's amazing to me. And when I was in 10th grade, I got something published, and it was published in a state magazine. It got national recognition in a scholastic magazine. And I thought, like, that's my ticket. Like, I want to be the next Stephen King. I want to write. I want to like thrill people with my imagination.
Yeah.
And then there was the reality of growing up in the military, especially coming back from Okinawa, was where I had my best friend. My best friend, that if I had lived in a normal hometown or lived in the kind of what
Yeah.
I saw as a normal environment, we would have gone through college together or high school together. We would have had all the experiences of prom,
Yeah.
going out on double dates with our, favorite girlfriends or whatever the case may be. That didn't happen because we left Okinawa. He went to Virginia. I came to North Carolina. And so now my teenage angst was rearing its head, and my focus was my father, because he was the reason why we were moving all the time. And so this created this very kind of caustic relationship and antagonistic relationship between he and I as I went through my high school years, because I can now say, well, my lack of popularity or my awkwardness, social awkwardness, was all because of him, because of this.
Has a name. Yeah.
Yeah, because I built this story up on he's the guy to blame.
Yeah.
And then when it got down to it, it was, well, I can either go to work to pay for college, because we're going to college. Like, there was no question that you're going to go to college, and you either get a scholarship or you work. And the last thing I wanted to do was join the Marines, like go on a military scholarship, but my grades weren't good enough academically to get an academic scholarship. And initially I thought, well, I'll join the Navy because it'll be like, I was so hostile towards the Marine Corps based on my upbringing. And I got to Penn State, and you have to take a class every semester that's naval science. And so the first two classes were engineering classes, like ships engineering, weapons engineering. And I have a liberal arts mind, or I did at the time anyway. And so the idea of doing engineering classes was antithetical to my upbringing. So I got my worst grades ever. And I remember I got home from college at the end of my freshman year, and they sent a letter of caution to my family saying, like, your grades have to improve or things are going to get bad. And my roommate was my best friend from high school. So we both went to Penn State. He had the same sort of mindset. So he wanted to join the Army. And at the end of our freshman year, we said, we got to get in the Marines. Like, we got to go back into the Marine Corps. And so we applied to go into the Marines, and that transitioned. And so it's not like you could just walk into the Marines. There's an application process, especially to be an officer. Yeah. So the first application process we went through, he got it and I didn't. And I was devastated. Because now it was like, well, wait a minute. Yeah. I grew up in this thing. Like, I'm a legacy. Like, what the, like, this should be natural. And it was kind of the first kick in my pants that, like, you have to perform. You have to become better. And so I stopped drinking. I exercised all the time. I would speed walk to class because I didn't want to be distracted by anyone. I just kind of cut myself off socially, and I made the dean's list. I got accepted to the Marine Corps. I went into the officer candidate school at the end of my junior year, and going through those gauntlets, like real manly gauntlets, and then coming out of them, you become unstoppable. And then I was like, I'm going to follow my dad's. I'm going to do the Marines for life. Like, this is it. And so it was a huge shift. Conversely, as much as I loved writing, and as much as I loved the idea of either writing screenplays or starring in movies in Hollywood, I was like, well, that was a kid stuff. Like, now I'm adulting, so I'm going to adult. And for me, adulting is going to be putting on a uniform and defending my country.
Yeah. And so when you got to the adulting phase, as they say, because you know how we come up with all these stories about adulting and whatever. And when you got into the military piece and you began to do the programming, because they are going to program you, you're going to the theater, as they say. You need to be prepared for your life there, because You got to be aware of your six senses and all the different things that they're now going to deposit in you. While they were doing all of that, David, depositing this in you, and you saw the importance, you're getting the man up thing.
Yeah.
How was David doing there? How was he when that was happening in his life?
To a large extent, David kind of took a back seat because it was now, I mean, the Marine Corps breaks you down, right? They want to
Yeah.
get rid of the individual so that
Mhm.
you become part of the tribe. I mean, it's a very
Yeah.
tribal community, and it's because it's not about you, it's about the organization, the entity. And how do you fit
Yeah.
into that? And there's this, so in some sense, the comic books went away, the video games went away, and it was all like, okay, let me become this other version of me that those things aren't a part of. As if I
Yeah.
could, and I think psychologically, I did try to split myself. I'm like, it's just not who I am anymore. Now let me really
Yeah.
do this. And so in that sense, the poet in me, because I used to write poetry, the writer, that person went away, especially like after
Yeah.
college. Even though I majored in English in college, I'm like, okay, that part of my life is done. And so now I'm in this tribe of men. For the first 2 years of my military career, I was surrounded by probably 95% men. There weren't a lot of
Yeah.
women certainly in the officer ranks in the military and the Marines at the time. And I think they were just starting to come into some of our classes, or, our schools, but it was testosterone. It was who
Mhm.
can lift the heaviest weights. It was, how
Yeah.
do you measure your degree of toughness by, in some ways it's, there's a phrase we used to have, it's easy to be hard, it's hard to be smart. Like it's
Yeah.
easy to look at this, it's kind of this Spartan way of like the hard way is the right way. And so you
Yeah.
just go on this, how do I burden myself and like become more and tougher? And that sensitive part of me didn't have space there. It would come up sometimes, but it was like, well,
Yeah.
I can't share my emotion in these, like
You
I'm not
can't
gonna write
put that
poetry
out
for
there.
these guys. And it just doesn't work that way. And
Yeah.
and certainly for the first few years, first I was in training for a year. So in the Marines, you go to what they call the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, and that's how you learn how to be an officer for 6 months. And you're out in the field, you're doing patrols, you're blowing things up. I mean, it's just this not toxic, but it's intoxicating in terms of the masculinity and just
Yeah.
all this like chest thumping. And then from Quantico, I went to my specialty school, which was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery. So I learned how to become an
Mhm.
artillery officer. So here's another
Yeah.
5.5, 6 months of training, and you're blowing more stuff up. You're blowing bigger stuff up.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, this is awesome. And then on top of that, they said, okay, now you're going to go out to the operating force.
Yeah.
And at the time they said, well, we need 2 lieutenants to go to a unit in California, and they're going to deploy in 5 months. So they're going to go on ships with the Navy for a 6-month deployment. Who wants to do that? I'm like, I'll do that. Sure. So
Yeah.
then you get out into the operating force and you're dropping out of helicopters. You're raiding the coast of Southern California, these little rubber boats. You're blowing more stuff up. You're working
Yeah.
with the infantry now, watch them blow stuff up. So it's this like, oh, this is great. And then you go on ship. And we went to Somalia. I was one of the initial Marines in Somalia. So I'm 23 years
Yeah.
old, leading Marines ashore in Somalia for Operation Restore Hope. It's almost overwhelming in terms of, this is it. Like, you're the pointy tip of the spear doing these things. And
Yeah.
it's, oh my gosh, this is what military life is like. And it's just like, I'm going to do this as long as I can. And then you get back from deployment and reality sets in. Because then what ends up happening is all the funding goes to someone else, and you are cleaning trucks and cleaning weapons and cleaning the barracks all the time because there's no money to go
Yeah.
train anymore. And so it was this really like, oh, this is the other side of military life. Like I'm not like a
Yeah.
Navy SEAL. I'm not training all the time. Like we're gonna go like WD-40 trucks in the motor pool for all day, and that's what the day is going to be like. Oh, well, that's very different. And so as my military career progressed, it was this realization that the childhood that I grew to dislike of moving every 2-3 years, I had now assigned to myself as my vocation. And I was getting paid to do the thing that I resented doing when I was a child. And it affected my relationships because in a marriage standpoint, I was looking at, okay, how do I convince someone to basically pick up their life and move with me?
Yeah.
And become that spouse. And that was a very different life. But the David that was the writer and the artist and this lover of life kind of took a back seat because it was like that part doesn't have bearing in this universe.
It's more like, And that's incredible, imagery of the adaptation, if you will, of one's life that you have to do based on the decision that you make.
Yeah.
It is a
Oh,
wonderful
huge.
example of that process. And so here you are, man. Read that you were out on there on the theater as well, and out there with the boys and the men, and how did that? And again, you had to put David on the shelf, and that split personality thing is a part of you guys' life, man. Especially for those that were exposed to art and writing and all that stuff before you
Yeah.
get out there, and now you have to manage this split personality as you're moving through life. David, you're in the military. I saw that you're out on the theater, as they say, and that's a totally different place to be in, to have that mindset to be in war, if you will. And once there, that's another, your adrenaline and all the different emotions and chemical stuff that is happening to those men and women that are out there is just mind boggling. And then you
Oh,
have
yeah.
to come back home with all this sensitivity and all that stuff up there all day long and on the theater. And then you come back home and you're quote unquote safe, and the family and nobody knows how to deal with you because we don't understand a thing that you're talking about, because your emotions are up here all day long and we're looking at you because we're not aware of that at all. How
Right.
did you do that transition? What did it look like to you, David? And how did we, the public, the society, as you're back, how did we look to you, and how did you assimilate in back into the family as far as regular day life?
The good news for me was so you're on ship for 6 months, but really we left California in October of 1992. We went to Hawaii, went to Japan, we went to Singapore, and then we got diverted to Somalia to do Restore Hope. And so we were there for 2 months. We allowed follow-on forces to come in. So the Army, the Air Force, the Marines all came in with tens of thousands of people. And then after 2 months, we got back on ship. We went to Kuwait for like a week and a half. And so we participated in Operation Desert Storm, but this was
Yeah.
also after the ceasefire, so the war had already fought. And then we came home, we went back to Singapore, back to Hawaii, back to Southern California. And because there was a genuine kind of nobility to Operation Restore Hope, and if people aren't familiar with it, this was when there
Yep.
was a famine going on in Somalia, and
Mhm.
there was one warlord in particular who was dominating
Yes.
the food supply. So there were tens of thousands of people were starving, and this guy was making sure that everyone got fed. And so what Clinton did was, let's go in and democratize this
Yeah.
and raise up all the other warlords to the one and pull the big warlord down. And that's what led to Black Hawk Down, if you've seen that movie. But there was a nobility initially when we got there that we're going to help provide food, provide medical attention, provide dental attention, all these kinds of things to these people. And so when we got back, it was very much kind of a hero's welcome, especially for us, because by the time we got back, things were deteriorating in Somalia, but we're the ones who were on TV getting the splash of, here's the Marines coming ashore in the opening morning hours of December 9th, 1992. And in that sense, it was very pleasing. Desert Storm had been, even though there'd been like a buildup to Desert Storm for a year, the war was over in a long weekend. Like it was a 40 or 96-hour war, basically. And so the sense that the military was so finely tuned was really, really impressive. And people had a different perspective, because prior to that, perspective of the military was like Bosnia, which wasn't really clear, but then it was Vietnam. And
Mhm.
Vietnam was not a good memory for most Americans in terms of
Yeah.
how the military is perceived. So coming back, it wasn't that strange, was more of, my family welcomed me back. Initially, I'd had a woman that I'd been in contact with in North Carolina, and when I went back to see her, I'm like, okay, I'm not seeing how I'm going to connect this woman from North Carolina. She's not going to come live with me in Southern California. I just couldn't make that connection work. So in that sense, it was still this disjointedness in terms of coming back. I was fortunate that the combat I saw in Somalia wasn't horrible. And I can certainly share, at least through my experience of being exposed to the effects of combat on other people, that I was fortunate that it was very minor compared to what other people have experienced. It doesn't say that it doesn't leave a mark on you, but you don't necessarily realize what it is because it's so slight that it doesn't have the psychological impact of
Yeah.
what we saw in Iraq or Afghanistan, a couple of years later. So in some sense, it was very easy to come back. I would say that the David, David was haunted by, how do I bring love into what I'm doing? Like, how do I really
Yeah.
bring love and sustainment and stability? Because in the military, it's very easy to look at, there is a very sort of traditional mindset around family. And it's, the wife is going to stay at home. She's going to raise the kids. She's going to participate in officer social functions with the other wives. And then the men go off to war and do their thing. And that was kind of the mindset I had, but that's also a very traditional, outdated mindset when you look at the world, certainly even 30 years ago, but even the world
Yeah.
today. So it was, how do I bring this aspect of me that I've suppressed to some degree and make it work as I move forward in my military career?
Yeah, and then once you got back in and you began, as you said, it wasn't as, crippling in some ways, but everything, the stories, the friends of friends losing people, stuff like that, it has an impact in there. You're heading into your corporate world. You're top of the line now, you're big boss, as they say. My friend used to say to us, he calls us the big mahaf. And you're the big mahaf as you're walking into the corporate world. That is also another adjustment, being there, dealing with different aspects of people and so forth. You learn much there. And then the pandemic shows up, David. Now, here comes another trauma, and this is a global trauma to all of us that are on this planet. And I lost family there. I lost quite a few friends and stuff like that when that trauma hit us. Talk to us briefly about your corporate world transition from the military, and then when the pandemic hit, because that's when life begins to switch around. This is when we are now going to bring you in contact back with David somewhere around here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, and so talk to us about that journey, if you will, and the reintroduction to David.
Yeah, so the reintroduction to David really kind of started in the early 2000s, probably right before 2001.
Yeah.
9/11. And it was because I wanted to get a psychology master's degree. And so I started taking classes at George Mason. I was assigned back in Quantico, Virginia. And one of my classes, there was just a woman stood up and told this really poignant story. And it inspired me so much, I started writing poetry again. And that was like this fire. I was like, oh my gosh, like it's been 10 years since I'd been writing poetry.
Yeah.
It was so invigorating because now I was using this creative part of my mind. And at the same time, my fellow Marines be like, are you gay? Like, you're writing poetry.
I
Like,
know
what are you
that's the
doing?
first thing they'll say.
Yeah. And I was just like, no, have you read, like, I'm writing about Achilles, or I'm writing about, and certainly I was writing love poems, sure. And
Yeah.
it was cool because those poems actually helped me I attended a master's program from the Marine Corps. And then there's a second year program that you had to apply to that was a very elite school. And my poetry was submitted as part of my application process. And they're like, yeah, we want this guy because his thinking is so different from other Marines. And it was
Yeah.
one of the best experiences of my life. So I got 2 masters. And then I was really, by that point, I was also very disenchanted because I realized in a lot of ways, I was using my dad's blueprint for life as my own blueprint. My dad did 31 years. That was kind of my plan.
Yeah.
I'd already gone through divorce. I had a daughter, and my Camelot, my kingdom was very much disheveled. And so I said, well, when it comes to love, the one thing I haven't done is switched what I do for a living. And so I made the decision to get out in 2006. I landed a job with Cisco Systems, the networking giant company. And the first 5 years was, okay, I've been programmed for 36 years of my life from the military. What the heck is a civilian? Like, how does this thing work? And I remember, I'll just tell you a funny story. Probably my first 6 months at the company, I was a manager, and I'd gone to lunch with some of the engineers, and we're walking up the stairwell back from lunch. And I was talking to somebody, and I just made a colorful way of expressing that I needed to use the bathroom, something that in the Marine Corps would have been just
normal.
great. And he looked at me in disgust, and he's like, keep it to yourself. And I was like, oh my gosh, they don't talk about that in civilian life. Oh, I got to completely change my paradigm. What was cool though was I now had a sense of stability because I realized I spent my first year at Cisco in Virginia Beach. And then because I had a relationship that was developing, I asked my boss, can I relocate to North Carolina? And he said, yes, Cisco's got a big campus here. And so I realized, oh my gosh, I can stabilize. Like, I'm not going to move anymore necessarily. And I can write. Like, I can become a writer. So for 11 years, I was learning how to civilianize myself and kind of do that whole thing. I became a yoga instructor because yoga helped me with the meditation and presence.
Yeah.
And that's what I realized I was really missing in my life, was a sense of presence. And then I started working on manuscripts as I was also going through, building up a relationship. And I was trying to write my next book or my first book. And so for 11 years, this process went on. I got married again. I got divorced again. And it goes back to what I had said earlier, this idea that women and God were somehow connected in a way that was almost my manifest destiny.
Yeah.
So I had success in Cisco. And after my divorce, I got into another relationship. That relationship was ending at the end of 2019.
Yeah.
And what was great about it was I knew the end of the relationship was the right thing. Like it was, you said it earlier, Jesus says, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. In 2017, I started going to Tony Robbins events. And Tony says the truth shall set you free. And what Tony does is he teaches people there is an inner architecture to your being. And it's through your beliefs and values. When they come in conflict, you have pain and you have struggle in your life. And so as I started going through this process of breaking myself out of the limiting beliefs that had held me back for so long, I realized I had to take accountability for my life, all of it. And that meant looking at this relationship that had started on shaky ground in the first place and realizing the best thing for it was going to be to end. And that was not an easy process. At the same time, in 2017, I published my first book. So this fulfillment of a childhood dream in concert with coming into this reconciliation that I am completely responsible for my being was this beautiful harmony, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. So in
was
2019,
that, Whiskey and Yoga?
Whiskey and Yoga,
the first book?
Yes, Find Your Purpose in Life. And so 2019 is coming to an end. My relationship is coming to an end. I had had success at Cisco, so I'd just gotten promoted the summer before the pandemic. I had an idea for my third book. My second book was going to be published in March of 2020. And then the pandemic hits and I'm like, all right, so I could try to play catch up. We had shared a house. My ex and I had shared a house that she owned. So I paid half the bills and she paid the other half. And I thought, well, I could start over again, or I could go live with family and work on my next book and really take time to process the fact that I have not accounted for the trauma that I have inflicted on myself through decades of negligence and not taking ownership for this.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me do plan B. Let me go live with family. Let me work on my third book. I'd become friends with someone as my relationship was coming down, and she was just this beautiful reference point for me. And as I got into January of 2020, I started journaling. I was like, well, I got to reconcile my relationship with God, whatever that is. Like I got to reconcile myself to that relationship. And so I started journaling to try to kind of sort out this being. And I was excited about my third book. I started as the pandemic started to enclose over us, I went to a mastermind in Santa Barbara, California with Jack Canfield. So Jack is a very famous author and speaker. He's sold more than 500 million copies of his Chicken Soup for the Soul books. And I went to this mastermind, and I think there were supposed to be 17 of us. We're going to meet at his house. But by then, the pandemic, COVID had shut everything down. So we're going to meet in a hotel. And the mayor of Santa Barbara said, you can't meet in hotels. So the president of his company brought us over, the 6 of us over to her house, and we did Zoom with Jack. And I told him about my determination to conquer love, like all these relationships I had, it just wasn't working out. I'd written 6 months of poems to my last partner, and nothing had worked. And so I shared him my idea for my book, and we went through that process. And he said, well, you've got a year. And I was like, what the heck does that mean? A year? Like, what are you talking about? At the same time, I'd gotten into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work. And Joe Dispenza is brilliant. Man. His last book, Becoming Supernatural, talks about the use of quantum physics to heal yourself from disease, whether it's Parkinson's, whether it's cancer. And they have scientific documented evidence that his And so he's got some very intense meditations that he provides. So I got to oh my gosh, they're amazing. So I got back from Santa Barbara the third weekend in March, and now the world was shut down. And I thought, just this weird thing that someone who never met me said, I've got a year. Okay, whatever that means. Well, let me do some of these meditations. And so it was March 31st. It was a Tuesday. And I did one of the meditations in my little bedroom. of the family I was staying with. And it was called Tuning Into New Potentials. And the idea of the meditation is that you pull your awareness out of your body and you go into the quantum field. And that's where the higher intelligence is. And so I did the meditation, and there's a very intense breathing exercise because he wants you to project your spinal fluid up your spinal column into the ventricle that surrounds your pineal gland, your third eye, and what's known in more esoteric circles. So I did this meditation. I remember it was like a tadpole wiggling free from its embryonic sac. My awareness just left. And then I was in this space, and it was just this download of information. And there weren't any images that I could recount from my life, but it was all themes of why my life had turned out the way it had. And it was all about love and relationships. And the meditation lasted about 30 or 45 minutes. And then I came out of it, and it's dark, and it's, a beautiful Tuesday night. And I said, I just experienced my judgment day. That was my life review that I consciously just went through. And it was so clear to me that that's what the message was. There wasn't any speculation. It was like, that was my judgment day. And so now there's this weird connection where I'm like, okay, pandemic, I've been looking for love my entire life. I have this weird encounter with Jack Canfield. Now there's this judgment day. So I go through the work week, and it's awesome in some ways because like I get my normal work done, and I've got 5 hours of the day left to myself because I realized how much of my day when I was in the office was not necessarily productive. I wasn't really writing much during the week. And then that weekend I said, well, let me start writing again. But now I want to write in a journal. I don't want to write on my computer anymore. I want to write this. I want to write my next book by hand because there's a visceral experience when you put pen to paper and it's your scribbly handwriting and everything else. So I started writing this book, and it was almost like a text message or a text conversation between two voices. One was the voice of being, and one was the voice of doing. And it was really cerebral. It was heady. And after about 3 hours of writing, I stopped and I took a break. And coming out of my last relationship, one of the things that I had done to try to soothe my ego, because we talked about ego earlier, was I started following beautiful women on Instagram. And that was how I was going to soothe my ego for whatever whatever soothing that would do. And I probably in February, I had started following this woman from France. And initially I wasn't going to follow her because she was a teacher. She's also like a semi-professional bodybuilder. So it's just like ripped and chiseled. But there was something in her eyes that's like made me say, okay, I'll follow her. I didn't feel worthy of it in some sense, but I'm like, all right, there's something about her eyes that I'm going to do. And I took a break while I was writing on this. I was sitting on my bed on a Saturday, and I pulled up my phone and Instagram, and there was this picture of her in this black dress standing in a field of wheat, looking off to the side. And within about 30 seconds, I was like, I've seen this picture before. Not that she's posted it before, but I've seen this picture before. And after about a minute, I said, I'm going to write my next book about this picture. Like, this is the picture. This is what I've been looking for my entire life. And I had this this swell of confidence and excitement and enthusiasm. And now it was, as a creative mind, I'm like, okay, pandemic, Jack Canfield, mysterious encounter, judgment day, beautiful woman. This is awesome. This is so cool. Oh my God. And so I was just like, I was through the roof. I was so inspired. I'm like, this is it. This is my life all coming together. And that enthusiasm was then sort of within a few hours struck by this, who are you to be thinking this thought? Who are you to be looking at a causal relationship between a worldwide pandemic, this mysterious encounter, this judgment day life review meditation, and now this woman? Like, who are you to put all these things together with the life you've lived, with the infidelities, with the deception, with the lies, with all the things you've done? Who are you to do this? And it was this very pronounced and profound schism of my being. And as I got through, and there were more encounters, kind of these deeply spiritual encounters that began to happen. But as I got through May into June, I couldn't write the book anymore. And it was like, oh my gosh, like this is taking me towards Christ. And it's taking me towards Christ in a way that is terrifying to me. Like, the reality of Christ is something that I physically don't have in my being. Intellectually, I understand it. Physically and emotionally, I don't necessarily have conviction of the truth of his story.
Yeah. That is a powerful imagery of lives and decisions in life and what we do. And those of you guys who are listening to our conversation, David had laid out so much stuff, man. I suggest you go back and listen to all those principles, powerful principles that one must incorporate into your life to assist in your personal development, journaling, yoga, meditation. He talked about so many different things. The journaling, these are powerful stuff. There's a scripture that says, write down the vision. And there's a reason why you write it down, because it helps you to clarify it and so forth. And as you begin to empty self, you get a chance to glimpse to see where you're at and what's going on within inside of you. And then you're able, he talked about going into some of these powerful meditation. I know Dr. Dispenza, because and even, I've interviewed so many different folks from that arena, if you will. And all of them talk about the meditation aspect. David talked about what it does, what it allows you to travel. Dr. Dispenza talks about the quantum realm and all these different things. And I'm a Christian, and I had to teach some Christians that the quantum realm and the heavenly places are the same location. It's just different languages from different aspects that are being talked about the same location. Because if you look in the Bible, it says that all your needs and all the stuff that you need is located within the heavenly realm. So go get it. And you get it through meditation and prayer and all these different tools that access it. But when we are there, everything, you can only go there in your essence. You can't bring nothing else but that. And when you sit there, you're able to have access to all those desires, all the needs that you have. They become tangible, if you will, and you're able to bring them into your being, and the manifestation will come. Go back and listen to what David has talked about. There's so much stuff in there. David talked about now you're in conflict with self, because of course that voice, the inner voice that comes to tell us that we are not, the limitation mindsets will always come, and we have to learn how to navigate through those limitation mindsets. But you can, and again, they're all thoughts, and thoughts are moving, not stationary. They're just things that come, and you can pick which one you want to give permission to. And you can do that with affirmation to interject certain things within that process of your thinking. So it's all up to you guys. You got to become responsible. Take ownership. If you can't take ownership, you will never grow as an individual, period. So here you are, man. All of this is happening to you at that time. Your book, you're not sure, all of these things. You're heading towards an awakening with conversation with Christ. And that's a beautiful person to sit down and have a conversation with, because you'll bring some tremendous amount of insights when you're there. And the wisdom that is sitting there with him and all of the different things is an incredible relationship. I want to encourage any one of you guys to go and do that, develop that relationship. There's so much there. So as you're heading there, David, and you have that encounter, because it is an encounter, how did that impact everything that you are now in this space right there? You are going to have an impactful invitation from God, and you're going to sit down with Jesus and talk. And then you're going to come out of that, and he's going to make you get yourself together to go do what you got to do. So talk to me as to how that happened, and what was the catalyst or the information, if you will, David, that he relayed to you as you're walking through and gaining that relationship that says, hey, show up, bro. Let's go. It's time to go. And what did you do with that?
Yeah. So to go back just a little bit, in January that year, my friend, this woman that I'd befriended at my gym, because she was an instructor there, she said, why don't you come live with my husband and I? And she's like 20 years younger than me. But she said, why don't you come? And I said, you know what? And so we'd hang out on the weekends. And then by May, I said, okay, this makes sense. Like, I don't want to live with family anymore. Let me go live with them. And it was almost like she was aware that I was going to go through something very trying and very dramatic. So by June, I moved in with them. I would work from home there. And then it was July 4th weekend, and I went back to my family's house, and I was just terrified because I couldn't understand all these things that were happening, and that I was a vessel to them. Like, that I was contemplating these things, and I realized it was kind of the realization of, do I believe Christ has conquered death or not?
Yeah.
And that's really what it came to. And I remember I was crying in the living room of my family's house. And I was like, is death really the end, or is that just the threshold? And I committed to myself, I'm going to pick up my cross, and I'm going to see where this thing takes me. And so by this point I said, I'm not worried about the book. I'm just trying to understand like what I'm going, like I'm just trying to get through the days. And there was no longer
Yeah.
there's no longer any forward planning of, well, this weekend I'm going to do this. It was,
Yeah.
let me get through the next 3 minutes of my life because of this experience of now the pandemic and now all these signs that I had. At the same time, in one sense, it was, I could hardly conceive of all the beauty that I saw in this
Yeah.
woman that had inspired me to go on this journey in the first place, in terms of, let me shift what I was going to write about to now write about this. And if you understand Jungian architecture, there's different ideas that we have different archetypes inside of us. And Jung
Mhm.
talking about the self, the persona, the anima, which is the female part of a man. It's called the animus in
Yeah.
women, and then the shadow. And so all these elements were starting to play in my life. And so I just, well, let me journal instead of trying to write the book. And let me talk with my friend, because she was at least a sympathetic ear that I could express some of these things to. At the same time, I started going back into the Bible. And I think actually before I even started reading the Bible, I read a book by David Bentley Hart called That All Shall Be Saved. And
Yeah.
it was just, and David is just a brilliant theologian, but he speaks in a very educated perspective. Like his language is incredible. But he talks about this idea that, do we really think that an omnipotent God would consciously create a being it knows is going to suffer for eternity? Because then you say, well, that God isn't all good then. Like that God, that just doesn't make sense. And so the premise of his book, that no, Jesus saves everyone, like this is legit. And so I had such a burden of shame that I'd carried with me for so long, because of, I hadn't processed any of those things. And so I had all this trauma stored in my body. And this was me trying to go through and reconcile it. And so as 2020 came to a close, we had the election. You see, COVID is running rampant across the globe. And we get into 2021. And I'd said, like, I had tried to express beautiful things to this woman on Instagram. And I'd say something and she'd say, oh, thank you. That's very sweet. And then finally in January of 2021, I had the courage to say, listen, you have inspired my belief in heaven. And I am writing a book about that inspiration. And again, she's like, great, thanks. That's very sweet. And yet I had this restlessness, and this restlessness started to manifest itself was, I want to move to Europe. Like I want to go, like, this woman is the key to my salvation. And that's kind of where I was, like, that's kind of what my mindset was, this idea that something outside me is going to save me.
Yeah.
And that led me to become antagonistic with the people who had so generously welcomed me into their home. And I remember at one point telling the woman, like, I don't want to be stuck here. It was a horrible thing to say. And within a week, she said, you need to move out. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So now I move out and I get my own place. And now I'm like, how do I function on my own? Because I haven't done that for a long time, because I've been in relationships for so long, and I just kind of swung from one relationship to the next without really becoming self-sufficient. And so I hired a nutritionist, and I started eating healthy, and I saw how my thoughts transformed by what I was putting into my body. So I was eating more cleanly. And at the same time, as I got through the spring of 2021, I got to this point where the year that Jack Canfield had said to me, I saw as like a sentence, like, okay, maybe this is my sentence of hell that Jack was just privy to. And so the milestone for that year came and went, and nothing changed. Like nothing happened. And the only thing that I could discern was, well, maybe I just made this whole thing up. Like maybe the woman is just a woman, and I wrote this big story, and I just need to let that go.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I'm going to stop following her. And it was terrifying to me, because I remember saying, I was like, this feels wrong, and I'm doing this because this woman, there's a connection to Jesus with this woman that I must acknowledge. And yet I'm turning away from this. At the same time, since September of 2020, a woman from Seattle had reached out to me on LinkedIn. And she was a coach for men. She was also French, like this woman from Instagram. And she was Christian. And so we would talk Bible verses. And she also very early on made it known that she was interested in me more than just a client or friendship. And I had said, I'm in love with Instagram lady. So I'm sorry, I'm unavailable. And by the time I got to April of 2021, I'm like, you know what? I made a mistake. I made a mistake with the French Instagram thing. So let me let that go. So this woman came out for a weekend in May. We had an amazing time. We talked all the time. And I was just like, oh, that's amazing. But there was a little part of me that was like, ooh, if she teaches me French, then I can learn French and I can like go back to Instagram. And so she went back home and I was like, okay, interesting. And then by June, she started talking marriage. And like, that was like, there's no way.
Yeah, that's
And so I wrote her, I sent her I broke up with her like video, which was really classy, but I sent her a video message and I said, listen, you've helped me get back closer to Christ, but I think about this woman all the time. And oh, by the way, this woman, her birthday is December 8th, which is when Catholics celebrate the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, when the Virgin Mary was conceived. And so I said, I'm sorry, I can't, we can't be together anymore. And so I sent her this video message, and within probably 15 seconds of sending it, it was like I felt this serpent, this giant serpent slide past the right side of my brain. It was just, for me, it was like Satan. It was like, oh my gosh, I was just tempted. Like I was tempted. And in some ways that was terrifying, but it was also like, wow, Christ is real. Like this is completely legit. So in some ways that was galvanizing. In some way it was traumatizing because now there was a psychological weight that I was really starting to feel. And I started going back to Tony Robbins events. And now I went to a program in October of that year called Leadership Academy. And this time what made this wild, Ken, was I wasn't just wrestling about Christianity. I was looking at Judaism. I was looking at Islam. Like these are all three Abrahamic religions. They're all connected. Even if their stories are seemingly disparate, but there's all this connection to them. And again, this voice would be like, who are you to be thinking about this? And as the fall progressed, coming out of that program, I decided I'm going to hire a coach. So I hired a coach from Tony Robbins. I started working with her and kind of laying the foundation. Over the course of these 2 years now, from like the end of 2019 to now getting to the end of 2021, I've been trying to figure out what the title of this book was. Like, what am I even working on? Because for me, I can't write the book unless I have the title. And so finally I got to November of 2021 and I was so frustrated because I'd gone through hundreds of titles. And I remember I was in my place and I just said out loud, what is this? What is this? And what came back to me was Love Letters to the Virgin Mary. And as soon as I said it out loud, I'm like, oh my God, that's it. That's it. So in December, I went to another Tony Robbins event, and these are all virtual because of the pandemic, so everything was shut down. So he would have 2,500 people at an event, and there would be 50 people in a Zoom room. And in that Zoom room, they'd have a couple of his trainers and a couple senior leaders, but there'd be staff in there for all the participants. And for this event, he has you fill out this like 20-page questionnaire of like, why are you coming to this event? What do you want to get out of it? And so I unloaded. I said, here's what happened during the pandemic. I spent my whole life looking for love. This woman, here's her name, all this stuff. And we get to the last day of the event. It was a 6-day event. We're going like 12, 16 hours a day. I mean, it's super intense. And the staff says, well, does anyone want to share what their experience has been? And I said, yeah, I'll chime in. So I said, for 2 years, I've been working on something that has terrified me. It's absolutely terrified me. It's forced me to grow in such a profound way because all growth takes place on the edge of our comfort zone. And I've been uncomfortable for the last 2 years, but I am writing a love story between King David and the Virgin Mary. And everyone's like, that's so beautiful. That's really beautiful. And after about 30 seconds, one of Tony's staff sent me a DM and they said, Tony wants to read your book when you're done. I was like, Tony Robbins wants to read my book? Yeah, baby, I made it. This is awesome. And it was really that inspiring. And yet after the event finished, I committed to myself, I'm taking the rest of December off from work and I'm going to write the first draft. Now that I know what the title of the book is, I'm going to write the first draft of this thing. And as I wrote that, as I kind of went through it, I wrote with this fever. I was possessed. I was like, I'm going to get this thing out of me. It's been 2 years. I've been dying to get this thing out of me. It's got to happen. And at the same time, I started to think, well, how did Tony Robbins know to be listening of the 2,500 people and probably the 50 Zoom rooms that they had going on wherever he was based? How did he know to be listening when I said exactly what I said so he could say he wants to read my book? And it was this huge revelation that, oh my gosh, this is much bigger than I kind of really appreciated. So I wrote the first draft. I finished it on New Year's Day in 2022. And then I went into what I would consider the most profound PTSD of my life for about 6 weeks, because I conceived of an idea that brought these three great figures together. And now I was going to own what that meant for me. And I knew within the first few weeks of January, I've cost myself my job at Cisco because they can see that my mental faculties, I'm not operating the way I should be because of what this story has demanded of me. And in some ways it was as just to really kind of shorten this up, as 2022 progressed, I was working with my coach. We met every week, and I didn't really want to talk about what I'd written because I was stunned by it. I went to Israel in April of that year. And then as I got through the summer of 2022, I realized it's not about the woman. All the beauty I saw in this woman in France is in me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like all that beauty the story that I create, all that is in me. This isn't about her. This is about my relationship with Jesus Christ. And
Yeah.
that was a huge and profound moment, because now I had the cognizance of, okay, I've cost myself my job. I had told my boss in August of 2022, I'll give you another year at tops. And then I got to figure out how to serve mankind, because this is where story's taking me.
Yeah.
And it was a profound revelation that to really truly contemplate Christ, it's not about going back through history. It's about realizing that he's eternal, like realizing that when you understand that consciousness is eternal and present and living, that's a completely different experience of life. It's not about religion. It's about religious experience. And religion, the original word, the meaning of the original word for religion, religio, means to bind together. So it's about the idea of cohesiveness and coming back together.
Is that journey, man. I know the journey when one walks that space and you get there. And when your assignment, as they say, and I always tell people, David, don't get a job. The job is to keep you from becoming a servant. It's to keep you from learning and discovering your assignment, and your assignment will cause you to become that servant. Seek your assignment while you're here on this planet. And the reason I use this example with Peter and his brothers and all those guys, they were fishing. They're fishermen. They're doing their job. And this guy comes on the shore and he says to them, "Hey, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." What the heck is fishers of men? Right. But it was something in that statement that triggered them to drop everything, because it tells us that they dropped everything and left. And they were having that conversation with the corporate America thing. I don't think I can go lateral. I can't go straight up. The conversation, because the security is in that fisherman's job, that a business. And they walked away. And your assignment, once you began to move towards that, will always change your trajectory. It will change you, and it will change your trajectory as to where you're going and what is demanded of you. It's a totally different place to be there. And here you are, David, you surrender to it, because everyone has to. I tell people Jesus did. He had to surrender to. He was in the garden and he had this conversation with his father. He said, "Wait a minute. Okay, I don't want to do this. Is there another way? Is there another way?" And he eventually comes out and he says, "No, man, tell you what, not my will, but thy will be done." He had to surrender, just like every one of us have to do that. Yeah. You can't get away from it. And so here you made your surrender, your appeal. You went down, you gave up the job, if you will, and you're now going to become fishers of men. When that transition took place in its fullness, David, and you had surrendered, you walked away and all of that stuff, because a lot of people think that when you do that, you're tipping to the tulip and all these things, the bed of roses. But when you read those boys' story in the New Testament, we saw that, one was hanging upside down. All kinds of crazy stuff was happening to those boys with that term of finding your assignment. It is not tipping to nothing. It's all about growth. When you made that, David, that transition, and you began to experience the release of the words coming and all of it, and the publishing of all of it, what happened to you and what was going through you at that time?
When I figured out the name of the book, Love Letters to the Virgin Mary, it was such this huge relief, and yet it didn't feel complete to me. And I got through February, and even though I wasn't talking with my coach about it, there was still something that was missing. And I was just searching online to, like, what's the subtitle for the book, kind of. And I don't know that I consciously thought about that, but it was the King David piece. There had to be an element to that made sense. And I went and I studied about 25 years ago. The two pastors wrote the Left Behind series, and it was a 12-book series, and it chronicled the idea that the rapture occurs and all these people get called up to heaven. And then the Antichrist comes, and the people who are left behind have to deal with him. And in the 12th book of the series, King David is resurrected. And I'd never heard that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Resurrection of King David. So I'm like, well, that's the subtitle for this next book then. love letters to the
Yeah.
Virgin Mary because Jesus is promised the throne of his father David. That's what
Mhm.
Mary is told by Gabriel. And I thought, well, okay. And I didn't understand the Davidic covenant. I didn't understand all the references to Jesus as the son of David or what that would mean.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, okay, well, that makes sense. So I took a few months off. I went to Israel in April. I went to Israel. It was Easter, Passover, and Ramadan all in the same week. So it was just this beautiful timing. And
Yep.
I mean, just to go there as a student of history, it was so profound to go there. Obviously, what I'm going through as well. So I got back in May. I said, okay, let me write this next draft. So I wrote the draft. I finished it in August. I sent it off to the team that I was working with to get it published. And as I said earlier, I had this revelation that it's not about the woman. This is truly about your relationship with Jesus Christ. In some sense, I had a vision of, well, the Bible ends with Christ's return. That's what I find fascinating about Christianity in particular today is it's a complete story. And so I started to think, well, how do you complete the story? Like how do you complete the story? And this would still take a long time for me to comprehend, but the writing process, especially the second draft, it was much softer because the first draft was very hard edged. It had the angst of having this penned up not just for 2 years, but my entire life. And now I'm trying to express it to this woman who had inspired me in such a capacity. So I've told my boss, hey, I'll give you a year. And I know the clock is ticking in my career. I'm much more in the Tony community now, and I'm working with people. I'm telling a little bit more of what my experience of the pandemic has been. If there's a humorous part of the story, it comes up now. So I wanted to get the book to France to this woman in time for her birthday, December 8th, especially knowing that there's this fascinating connection between her birthday and the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So I got it to her for her birthday. I don't hear anything from her. I sent it to a FedEx and just an address that I had. And so it's December 23rd. And she posts something on Instagram. It was like, who sent me this package? And so I said, it was me. And so we have this really sort of heated text conversation. And she's like, who are you? Why did you send me this package? I didn't ask for it. I don't want it. Call FedEx and take it back. And I'm like, oh, this is right before Christmas. Really? This is fantastic. Like, great. Okay. I said, all right, great. I'll do it. Fine. So after the holidays, I call FedEx and they're saying, well, it's been delivered to its final destination. We can't do anything about it. I'm like, all right, well, it's done. It's done. This is so fitting in some ways. So, Cisco let me go. So the week after the week after her birthday in December, I found out I was being let go by Cisco. So not a surprise. I told my boss, I knew I'd flagged myself. And quite frankly, the idea that I could maintain a sense of normalcy in a corporate job with then the scales just did not even, there was no balancing the scales.
Yeah.
At the same time, there was a psychological cost to that too, because now it's okay.
Yeah.
Now you're dealing with all this and you just lost your job and your 6-figure source of income.
Mm-hmm.
So now you get to deal with this too. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So January goes, February, get to the end of February, and this woman reaches out again. And she's like, FedEx is asking me to pay for the package to pick it up. I told you to call them. And I'm like, listen, I did. They said they can't do anything about it. And then finally I said, do you remember 2 years ago when I told you had inspired my belief in heaven and I was writing a book about it? I said, that's all this is. That's all this is. I just want you to have a copy of the book. If you don't want it, tell me, I'll pay the charges. Send me something and I'll pay it. And she just wrote back. She's like, that's really sweet of you, but this is really strange. I said, I'll pay. And I didn't hear anything from her. The next day I'm doing laundry, folding laundry in my bed. And this message just came to me through the ether that she picked up the book. She picked up the package. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then I stopped following her on Instagram. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
This is about me and Christ. Let me go through this.
Yep.
And at the meantime, I had started to write a sequel to Love Letters to the Virgin Mary. And it was like, well, if I'm going to conceive of this idea, then I really need to own my relationship with Christ. So I said, all right, so I'm going to call it Love Letters to Jesus. And it was, there's a piece of the story that is so fantastic, and yet it's grounded in history, and it involves Thor, the god of thunder. So the Marvel, Chris Hemsworth. But it goes back to, if you go back to ancient Rome, when the Romans were trying to conquer Germania before Germany became a state, hundreds of years before Germany became a state, jewelers at the time didn't know if their customers were going to prefer Jesus or Thor. And so they found molds that have crosses in them and hammers in them because the jewelers wanted to be covered either way. I had seen in the first Marvel movie of Thor back from 2011, there is a distinct and explicit reference to King David.
Yeah.
And it's and I had this experience. I'm like, okay, the destruction, like Ragnarok and what they call it in Norse mythology is the destruction, the doom of gods and men. So this kind of complete picture. So I was going to call the second book, Love Letters to Jesus, the Heart of Ragnarok. And just the idea that there had to be, if Jesus, and I'll say this, it's a more cerebral contemplation of Christ, but if we look at him as the Logos, so the Logos is the divine order of all reason and creation, then there has to be an anti-Logos. And that anti-Logos isn't evil per se, it's ignorance. It's ignorance, it's shame, and because it's got to be the idea of Christ's universal salvation has to have a counterpoint to it. And I'm still working with my coach through 2023 now, and I'd written about 80% of Love Letters to Jesus. And then I said, well, this isn't really going to serve people. And so I started working in a book called Bringing God to Life. And it was the idea that heaven and earth, to really kind of step back and say, well, there have been 116 billion people that have lived through human history that we would consider intelligent parts of our species. So heaven must be huge, because even if we say we've had multiple lives or, anything that becomes more esoteric, there still has to be this giant responsibility that is placed on Christ, because after his resurrection, he says, I have been given all authority over heaven and earth.
Yeah.
So you realize it's his kingdom. So finally, in September of 2023, it said, you know what? The one thing that I haven't really done is looked at the Bible story from King David's perspective. So let me, like a method actor, let me put myself into the Bible story as King David to see what his experience is. And that's what I discovered. Well, there's a covenant made to David by God that says your kingdom will last forever. Your offspring is going to establish an everlasting kingdom and your everlasting throne. And David is overjoyed. He's like, this is awesome. You're making this promise to a human. So David's anointed, and then he sleeps with Bathsheba. And then he has Bathsheba's husband killed. And then he curses himself. And Nathan, the prophet, tells him, you've turned your house against you. Your house is going to die by the sword. And there's this implication that it just means Solomon and what happens with Absalom and all these other things. But when you look at the covenant between the fact that David is now tied to the Messiah and Judaism is tied to the Messiah through King David, it becomes a much more compelling story. So I finished towards the end of 2023, I had a better sense of, okay, let me finish Bringing God to Life, this book. And I wrote that out for the first few months going into 2024. I had created a program to go with the book, and I was going to call it Performance of a Lifetime. Because if you start to think about, well, if heaven is huge, it must be multiple universes. It has to be like multiple universes. And we're seeing that play out in some of our cinema today. And so the idea was that you're the hero of your own story. And obviously to reconcile your faith in everlasting life, you have to go up against what you believe that is counter to that idea. Like, Jesus says, you believe in me, everlasting life is yours. So how do you refine that sense of belief within you? And that's what I went through 2024 going into. And then we got to May of 2024. I'd finished the program, I'd finished the book, and my coach is like, yeah, but it's still just a performance. It's not really like legit. I was like, come on, lady. Like, what do you want from me? And so then I stepped back and I said, well, okay, what is the greatest test of faith? And the answer that came back to me is the greatest test of faith is, has Christ conquered death or not? And how do you awaken that within yourself? Because it has to be the idea that, I've gone to church probably hundreds of times and said, I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. But I never really thought about what that meant. Like, what does that really mean? And it has to be a conscious act. And one of the things that I've learned from the Tony Robbins community is Tony is a master of neuroscience and neuroplasticity and how we use our nervous system to rewire our thoughts and beliefs. And it's just like shooting a basketball. Steph Curry is a brilliant three-point shooter because he's done it thousands of times, because he's got the muscle memory in his body. Well, faith is just a muscle memory that we need to cultivate within us. And so it's affirmation or it's incantations. So I came to this idea that, well, if the greatest test of faith is Christ done what he set out to, from King David's perspective, David, I've talked to some pastors and they're like, well, of course David went to heaven. Because I'll say, well, in Acts 2:34, it says David does not ascend to heaven. And because he says to the Messiah, sit at my right hand while I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And the footstool is the earth. And then you go back into the Psalms, and David says, from the depths of the earth, you will raise me up again. You go to Jeremiah 39, and it says, I will raise up my servant David. And so there's this, I'm like, okay, so then the idea that resurrection is the conscious act starts to make sense. And the idea that the pandemic happens and then the AI starts to rise up and we're building this bridge towards a higher level of intelligence, it all starts to make sense. But I said, if the greatest test of faith is, has Christ conquered death, then King David implicitly must believe that Christ has established the everlasting kingdom. Like it's not that he's there already in the kingdom. That wouldn't make sense to me. And so I said, from that, let me write this book, Becoming One with Christ. Let me look at the biblical history of this relationship and the implications of the covenant, and not just the covenant from our understanding of it, but the covenant from what it means from a Hebrew perspective. Because this is all, again, this comes back to Judaism. And there's a reason why the Star of David is a symbol of Israel, because there's an implicit idea that there must be a succession of the throne. If there's a line of kings, a dynasty of kings between King David and Christ sits on the throne, then all our focus and direction should go towards Christ as the ruler of that eternal kingdom. And so I started writing the book. I finished it in November of 2024. And by that point, one of the biggest transformations through the power of incantations I'll share with you, Ken, was I told myself over and over again, I see the light of Christ in everything and everyone. Because if Jesus is the light of the world, that speaks to a sense of consciousness. And if we look at people based on what they look like or what they believe and hold them accountable to those beliefs, and we don't say, well, they're not in Christ because they're Muslim or they're Hindu, they don't believe in Christ, that's a limitation on us, because it's the idea of, if Christ is universal, then he defies religion. He's beyond the Catholicism. He's beyond Protestantism. Christ is a universal truth. That goes back to this idea of the logos, the divine order of things. And that insight kind of gave me this breath of clarity, and to then train myself, condition myself to break through the programming of my cultural beliefs and upbringing and the military indoctrination to say, no, Christ is universal. That's the light of the world, was transformative for me. And that really, to kind of bring it back to the woman in France. So I'd stopped following her in February 2023. Last February in 2024, I said, well, let me see how she's doing. Let me see how she's doing. And let me see, more importantly, how I respond when I look at her. So I searched on Instagram. I found her, still see all the beauty, the light of Christ is what I realized that picture represented for me when I first saw her. And so then in Easter of last year, the Holy Week of Easter, I check my news feed at least once a day. And on Wednesday of Holy Week, an image of her, she appears sometimes in health and fitness ads. She does health and fitness work, let me say that. For the first time ever, she appeared on my news feed. And this is a major news site, in a health and fitness ad. And I was like, okay, that's not coincidental. So I took an image of it. And then last June, I just sent her a note. I said, hey, I stopped following you because I need to focus on my faith, regardless of what you think of me. And Jesus is obviously so much more than child of two people, but his story depends on two human beings. Here's the picture that showed up for me during Easter. Your birthday is when Catholics celebrate Virgin Mary. I just want you to know that I am going to honor the light I see in your eyes because of where it led me in my faith. She read the messages and we haven't talked since. And yet for me, it's been, now I'm to the point where, okay, how do I share my message? How do I make this explainable to people so that they can realize it's about waking up something inside you? It's not about looking outside you for salvation.
That is beautiful. I love it, man. All you guys that have been listening to us, David and I, we're going to provide you links for you guys to get access to him for his books and his workshops and stuff like that. You need to get there and I know we haven't even touched the surface with David, and he has spent some time with us already. I want to make sure that you guys have access to everything that he has so that you can get into his space, drink from him and of him, learn and change your life. Find your assignment so that you can be able to become more effective in your life on this planet Earth. We have a limited time, all of us, but I love your insights, and I'm going to pick up a couple myself and track you and see where you're at as far as all the books. So I'm going to grab a couple of those as well. But I encourage you guys and invite you to do the same. David, man, we may have to bring you back, but thank you so much for coming to the Threads of Enlightenment and just talking and sharing and making yourself available to us in such a humble fashion. Thank you so much, man.
Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure. I had no idea that we would talk for this long, but hopefully it's been rewarding and serves your audience. I'm excited that my next book is coming out and how it's going to serve people as well as the courses that I'm creating too.
Definitely, we'll make sure that we have that access for them. And I enjoyed it absolutely from the starting to the end of it. And I love your mind and how you look at things, especially when it comes to Jesus and the Bible and different things and your approach of it. So for me, it's been a really good one. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.